So now we are coming into one of the really fundamental um, and very catastrophic events out of Western civilization. That was, in fact, not just, of course, something that the West had to get through. It was not Western War Part 2, it was World War II. But um, it did have serious implications for the West. And I teach, World War I and World War II from a world perspective and from a Western perspective. And you really can't separate the two, although I try to emphasize more here on the Western aspect. But again, just remember this World War I and World War II, and other people in the world got dragged into a war that really wasn't of their making, but they still had to suffer from, no less. And as we saw with World War I think most of you can agree that, as I was saying, most people cannot even explain or start with, what was World War I could say at least in the United States. And World War II is that war that I think everybody thinks they know. And I would argue that the movie industry has probably made this an illusion of knowledge. And I'm not completely making an attack on all films about World War II. The issue that I have is that we're getting often a very sensationalist and very limited perspective coming out of these various films. So I often kind of bring up Private Ryan, but not to pick on the film. I think it's actually a very intense and powerful film. But when one just watches these kind of films, I think it's fair to say that for Americans, we know about Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor. Very significant, yes, we should know that. We know about the terrible atrocities of the Nazis with the Jews in particular. Yes, I'm not going to revise that history or anything like that. But as we've discussed with King Leopold II of Belgium, and we discussed with the Armenians in Turkey, that he certainly wasn't the only one to address when it came to human atrocities and genocidal practices. Okay, and we know about we will watch a lot of films like Saving Private Ryan. Sometimes people will watch things about Stalingrad, but ultimately it's seen through American eyes, and that's fair. We're Americans. We're North Americans, United States. But are you aware that close to 50% of the casualties of World War II are going to be Soviet citizens? Okay, it's Hitler that's defeated by Stalin. Okay, there's a lot of events that take place during this time that are crucial to understand that you don't get by just watching Hollywood films. And I feel like even if you look at Schindler's List, a very powerful film. I don't know if you notice this, aesthetically, just by looking at the film. Schindler was actually a German Nazi himself, and he ended up feeling bad about it. And he didn't just feel bad about it, he then actually made a decision to risk his life and his fortune as a wealthy, powerful man to save Jewish lives. So here was a man who was a German Nazi party member who really, it wasn't in his interests to make a morally right decision and put himself at risk. Okay? But in the film, he doesn't have a German accent. You'll notice that. It's the Nazi that has, soldier guy, the equivalent, the one he's always hanging out with, the really sadistic guy in the film. And so what we're not getting is the fact that, that people did have agency, and some people, in certain environments, did go against their own interests to make right choices, and that there was a choice to, people could make choices to make right decisions or wrong decisions. That's just now. I'm just giving you my little critique of certain films here, okay? And you can take that with a grain of salt. I just want to point out that for me as a historian and teaching history and looking at films, and one can criticize my analysis of the films out there, which is fair, but it's not neutral in the sense that it's not just entertainment. It's a way of perceiving events, and it colors our interpretation of them, and sometimes falsely, or gives us a limited perspective when we're not really delving into a lot of the things going on. And so I think historical novels and films made about actual historical events are really important, but we have to remember that those are art forms that are not fully committed to actually telling the historical truth, where a documentary, we know we can accuse it of that. But you get a film and a novel, you want it to be good. You want it to get you in the gut, right? You want to have anticipation and all sorts of things that you want a bestseller kind of thing. And it's interesting, whether you're watching a film about Malcolm X or, again, World War II, the creators of those films always will tell you that, I changed the section here because it just, on film, this looked better, So beware of that. Braveheart, great film. It's a train wreck of history. It's one of the most distorted. If you think that you're understanding Scottish resistance in that time period and who Braveheart was, you're lost if you watch that film. So why am I talking so long on this? Because World War II is so much a part of our imagination in the West. It's one that we really do talk and think about a lot. I don't have a problem with that. The issue is don't let Hollywood be the sole means in which you have, kind of walked into this. So moving on from that, let's actually talk about this, okay? The events, the coming of the war, and all these situations that are going to develop in stages. As we talked about, some of these pictures are really horrific, and some we've seen before, but it's hard to look at. This one in particular, it just gets me. I'm a father, okay? And I just want to point out something, though. We have to make ourselves look at this just a little bit, and we need to think about it just a little bit, because whether you're a pacifist or someone who believes in the necessity of fighting for your country, and I'm not a pacifist, so some of my students serve in the military, some don't, some are anti-war, some are in between. No matter who we are, we cannot remove this knowledge from the fact that when you have a war, this is inevitably what's going to come out of it. Because no matter how hard you try to avoid something like this, a bomb is going to drop and there's going to be a kid somewhere. Okay? There's not, and rather you can even blame it on the, militants or insurgents and say, well, they put families there. No, look. That's what I'm saying. Okay? And, sometimes I think that we as Americans, because we have not had a war fought in our soil, other than we killing ourselves over the issue of slavery and Civil War. Another more recent war that we tend to not really even fully come to terms with. We never saw our country look like this. We didn't ever see this. Our troops did in Europe came back with these images in their head. And I guarantee you they didn't talk about them too much. So again, we're going to move on from that picture. Okay. Americans, I feel like, also sometimes have this kind of video game approach to war, where it's like, we so quickly talk about it and forget that aspect, or and maybe I'm being unfair. I'm making generalizations, or I sound condemning of my own. I say Americans are that way, but I think that that's a privilege that we haven't had that happen on our soil through a foreign invasion, through foreign bombs. Okay. And I just think that we should just really be cautious and thoughtful about what that means. That's all I'm trying to say there. Okay. Now, the coming of the war, what led up to this war, are very important things. And now I'm going to actually get into discussing, this build up and start of World War II.